Welcome back, everyone, to the sixth Sunday in ordinary time, this ordinary time. Also, it's our last Sunday in ordinary time for the moment. We begin Lent this coming Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, and leads us into Lent preparation for renewal of baptismal promises. That's the reason behind Lent. And a renewal of our Christian commitment, our baptismal promises, which we would in ordinary, normal times renew at the Easter Vigil. And as part of the renewal of our commitment to being charitable, we will choose something to do without, hence the fasting. But it's always so that what I do without, somebody else can benefit from it. It's not just deprivation. If I do without some item or other, I then give it to someone else. If I deprive myself of, we'd say, communications device time, it's because that time I will now spend with helping a sister or brother with their homework, imagine, or I would talk to a grandparent or to a neighbor that you know you can talk through the window and things of that nature. That's what fasting is. It's always about someone else. If it's not Christian fasting, plain and simple. So a thought to keep in mind is what you are going to do without to benefit someone else. It's very broad. Actually, that might be a good question for your CCE. With your parents and grandparents, sit down, decide together, what is it that I will forego, do without, abstain from, fast, which will benefit someone else. And of course, it benefits me as well, but primarily, I'm not the focus. The focus is someone else. To the scripture readings. The book of Leviticus, meaning the book of the priest, the Levites, has a very strange concept, which is very hard to understand. And I only got a handle on it by digging through Jewish commentaries on this. Less so among the Christians, sadly, but nevertheless. It talks about a disease that's translated as leprosy. But the leprosy came in around the 3rd century before Christ, when the Hebrew scripture was translated into Greek. They had no term to describe what was in Hebrew as tza'arat. There was no way. Tza'arat was something that affected a building, the walls. It affected one's clothing. It affected one's furniture. It affected one's body. Therefore, it's not a medical disease. Also, because it's in the book of the priests, Leviticus, the priests were not doctors. And the Torah is not a book about medicine. Keep that in mind. So this tza'arat, as it is in Hebrew, was translated by the Greek lepra, so hence we had leprosy. Hansen's disease, which is leprosy, did not exist in Old Testament or in the Hebrew biblical period in Palestine. It came in probably around the year 300 from the East, may have been brought back into the Western world and the Middle East and Palestine, maybe by Alexander the Great and his troops, who moved as far east as India, Afghanistan, and brought it home with them. That is a possibility. It is not Hansen's disease. And the scripture is not a book of medicine. Those should be the first things we keep in mind. Two major commentators on this issue of what is this leprosy, as we call it, Sa'arat in Hebrew, were Maimonides and Sephora, both biblical commentators, and both of them medical people. They were doctors. They categorically state this is not a human disease. Let's get that through our thick skulls first, and then we'll deal with the conundrum. To back up what I'm saying, when the so-called leper approaches Jesus in the gospel, note, he did not ask to be healed. He asked to be cleansed. There is a difference. Cleansing, impurity, had to do with the priest, not a doctor. So it's referring to something else. When Jesus heals the man, we'll stay with healing, he asks him to go to the priest. Now, it did not mean necessarily to the temple. Priests lived outside of Jerusalem. We know that because a priest and a Levite were going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, highly likely going home after they had done their priestly duty in the temple. He could have gone to a priest in the local village. Priests lived elsewhere. Broaden your scriptural knowledge here. The man is cleansed, and he is to go, as Jesus says, to the priest as proof to him that he has been cleansed, not healed. Keep all that in mind. And then we'll deal with the challenge of what it very highly likely means from Jewish commentators on the Torah. Paul, writing to the Corinthians, very good advice actually, and he speaks about whatever you eat or drink. The issue here was meat that was bought in the meat market was highly likely offered in sacrifice to idols in the temple. Now, Paul is aware, as are those well-founded in their Christian and Jewish faith, that there is no God but God. An idol is in the imagination, in the sense of another God. There are idols, by the way, power, wealth, so on and so on, which we adore. Even oneself can become an idol. But the meat that was bought in the market being offered to an idol, Paul has stated prior to this, could scandalize and cause offense to a person who believed in these things, or hence maybe have been coming from these pagan Greek Roman backgrounds. And for them, it was real until they have a deeper sense of their own faith and grow in their faith. So Paul says, don't offend people because you have a stronger faith and they have a weaker. Don't scandalize them. That's not the purpose. Also, if you are the guest in a house, a household that is not either, we'd say, Jewish or Christian, your good pagan neighbours invite you for a meal and they offer meat, don't turn it down. Don't offend your host. Practical. So no matter how you eat or drink or what habits you may have, above all, don't offend each other. And he says, be imitators of me in every way as I am of Christ. The whole point is, do not be offensive. Good advice. Look at the scripture and now read them from the perspective. Leprosy is, as it's translated, most certainly in the Hebrew scripture, is not talking about a physical disease. Use your imagination. What's going on? And actually, if you look up the book of Leviticus chapter 13 and 14, there's where all the prescriptions are for a person who has this ailment, we'll call it for the moment, and how it was to be cleansed, and why the person was banished from the camp, ostracized, thrown out of the community, shunned, whatever. Read it. I will see you shortly. Trust me, if you haven't figured out what this ta'arat is, that is translated, because they have no other term for it, with the Greek term lepra. And the only reason they used that term was because it manifested itself as a mold or a discoloration in the wall of the house, one's clothing, one's furniture, and it was a progression. It went from one to another. It spread, and also it spread to one's skin. Right. There is a comment in Deuteronomy about Miriam, and she is punished, and she's sent outside the camp. And the infliction is also described as what we call leprosy, but it is a punishment for a particular sin. The sin is what is literally translated evil speech, malicious gossip. What Miriam and her brother Aaron had done was they had disparaged the good name of their brother Moses. Why does God not speak? Doesn't God, aren't we equal to Moses? Why does Moses think that God speaks only to him, and so on and so on? So they disparage him. And basically it's down to that God has chosen Moses for a particular role, and it's not the role given to Miriam and Aaron. They have different roles. But the jealousy creeps in, the disparaging of character. It is this evil speech that affects her, and it said her arm was as white as a baby's skin, like a leper. It's the same term. Now, let's move in a different direction. That's just a heads up. The book of Leviticus, the book of the priests, had to do with sacred space, sacred time, the holy, the unholy, the pure, the impure, the religious, the secular, and it had to do with boundaries. There is a religious boundary in terms of this is holy, this is not, meaning this is of God, this is not of God. What they're describing is the boundaries have been breached. So something is being defiled. Polluted, actually, is the term. It's not a disease. The holy is being contaminated, if you wish. And it is described as the sin that seeks to be hidden. It affects the walls of a house. They hide what's inside the house. It affects the furniture. It cries out to be noticed. It affects one's clothing. It affects one's skin. These are all boundaries. The walls of a house, one's clothing hides what's beneath it, and one's skin covers what is deep within oneself, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, your mindset. The sin in Leviticus is a reminder that the sin that seeks to hide will be publicized. It's another way of saying that a sin will not go unpunished. Malicious talk is usually done, and malicious gossip is usually done in hushed tones, in privacy, dark corners, if you wish. And a perfect place for it now, sadly, is online. You can say things about anybody that you would not say to their face in a conventional conversation. So the sense of limitation is now thrown to the wind. Notwithstanding, you can actually use a false name online. you can destroy a person's character. Hence, character assassination. You can destroy somebody. The unholy thing is, it's not of God. It's not who God expects us to be. The destruction of another person's life and character. How many people do we know whose lives have been absolutely ruined? Some people, sadly, teenagers, have taken their lives because of what has been said about them falsely online. And the people who perpetuate it, basically it attacks trust in a relationship. When trust in a relationship is eroded between people, it falls apart. Truthfulness is lost. Fake news, false news, a form of malicious gossip, the destruction of another, the taking of their character. We all have the capacity to do it. So what did the Hebrew people do? Going back to Leviticus, they were nation forming. They were coming together as a people. And if everybody was disparaged, Moses was disparaged, the nation would fall apart. They'd lose trust in them. One is saying one thing, the other is saying another. A person's word is their bond. I remember my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, saying to us as children, she said, in life, if you have nothing, she said, you have your word. Always keep your word. Be true to it. Be honest about it. You don't have to be, as Paul reminds us, insensitive. You don't have to blurt everything out. Do not be offensive. Do not lie. The psalm for this Sunday is intriguing. It says, blessed is he or she whose fault is taken away, whose sin is covered. The leprosy is the sin that is exposed. It's uncovered. It is made public. The person who is destructive is called out. They are shunned. And in early Jewish society, the time of the Torah, they were expelled from the camp because they were so destructive. And they have the capacity to destroy relationships in the community, hence the beginning and the fracturing of a community. We see that ourselves today. It can happen in family, but it's about malicious gossip. When a person truly knows they're lying through their teeth, they're not telling the truth for whatever reason to destroy another person's character. The limits where we want to hide on the internet, in the book of Leviticus, it was within the confines of one's house. But Moses, the Levites, the priests, are told it will be exposed. You will not hide it. It will contaminate everything. We will see you for who you are eventually. Hence, you are exposed. Your sin is uncovered. And how they have expressed it is, it comes out on your body, in your clothing, in your house, the walls, the furniture. Another way of putting it is, it will not be hidden forever. Someone is going to say something. Somebody is going to confront you. Somebody will be honest enough to say that what you are doing is outright malicious. You will be exposed. That is the sin. Now go to the gospel. Here is a person who has been ostracized for, we'd say, it's he in this sense. Now, he could have been a leper, maybe, but unlikely, because it had to do with cleanliness, not healing of a physical ailment. And I have read almost no commentary among the Christian commentators that take the Jewish understanding of their own Torah and what this sa'arat is, that is translated as leprosy, because there was no word for it in Greek. There's no word for it in English, except we know it is a punishment. It's a very graphic way of describing, it will not stay, it will not be silenced, it will not be hidden. Or, as the psalmist says, your sin will be covered. That means forgiveness. And also, look, blessed is the one to whom the Lord imputes no guilt. Forgiveness has been given. In whose spirit there is no guile, duplicity, two-faced. See the sin that's mentioned in the psalm? John's gospel speaks of Philip, I think, where Jesus sees him and says, here is a person in whom there is no guile, there is no duplicity. He is not two-faced. One thing to you and another thing behind your back. It's a despicable form of character. It's destructive of oneself and of others. In the diminishing of another person, the one who does it is equally, is diminished also. This person comes to Jesus to be cleansed. I would say to be accepted back into the community, to be forgiven, in that sense healed. We have that process in our church through the sacrament of reconciliation. We do it ourselves, where we take responsibility for what we have done, and we cease and desist, and we make amends. Stop it. Good place to begin our Lenten practice. Be careful what you read on the internet. And I love that ad on TV that says, well, I read it on the internet, so it has to be true. Be a little more picky, critical. Don't be so gullible. The scripture is taking us in that direction. The man is sent to the priest, who deals with not medicine, by the way, but cleanliness. His holiness is now restored. His wholeness, he becomes a whole person. He becomes holy. He becomes more a reflection of God and who God calls us to be. I will see you next week, which will be Lent, of course. We sadly now have to leave Mark's Gospel aside because the scriptures for Lent are specifically chosen with the Lenten process of preparation to consider others as well as myself as my Lenten journey. Lent is Middle English for springtime. It's a new spring, new growth, new life. Look at it from that perspective. See you Sunday.